very good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's seminar titled Did Nepal Change? Vote for Change. This session is jointly organized by the Institute of South Asian Studies and Nepal Economic Forum. Before we proceed with today's discussion, I would appreciate it if you could mute your videos and microphones throughout the session. If you have any questions to share, please forward them via the Zoom chat to me. I will consolidate your questions for the speakers to answer during Q&A time. This afternoon, we are delighted to have with us our guest speaker, Mr. Sujeev Shakya, to discuss on the key issues relating to Nepal's parliamentary elections that just concluded on 20th November. Mr. Shakya is the chair of Nepal Economic Forum and the chief executive officer of Bid Management. At the same time, he is serving as senior advisor to the Boer Group Asia. This seminar today is chaired by Dr. Amit Ranjan, a research fellow here at ISAS, and I will now hand over the session to Dr. Ranjan. Dr. Ranjan, please start.
Thanks, Claudia, and thank you everyone for joining us. On 20th November, Nepal went on polls to elect new members to the Federal and Provincial Assembly. Initially, there were some political commentators and thought that there would be a straight contest between the ruling alliance and the opposition. However, two smaller parties, political groups, appeared really very well. One of the grievances at that time many Nepali voters had was the absence of fresh face and new candidates, as many of those contested elections from a major political party, especially the established political parties in Nepal, have already been tested many times. Post-elections and results, Nepal is still waiting for its new leader. The smaller groups are still in negotiation with the major political parties and vice versa to form the next government. Whosoever going to lead the country has a huge task on all fronts. The new leader has to come out with an effective policy to manage Nepal's economy. Inflation rate is already very high. And there's an increase in unemployment. According to Nepal's last inflation expectation survey for the first quarter of 2022-23, inflation is expected to hit 12% within a year. The new leader has to try to provide political stability in the country by keeping the alliance partners together for a longer period of time. Then the new prime minister has to also take care of country's foreign policy, where major actors, India, China, and now the US are playing a bigger role. To discuss the recently concluded elections and afterward developments in Nepal today, we have Sujeev Shakya. Sujeev, please go ahead.
Thank you, Amit. Yeah, welcome to this discussion, and the way we have formatted it is that I would speak for about 15 minutes, and then we would have Amit lead the Q&A section. So just as well, I've been introduced, there are a couple of caveats as well as the background I come from. Surely, as the chair of Nepal Economic Forum, we've been working on providing inputs and providing different updates around the election. So we've been watching it very closely. Also representing Boer Group Asia for India and Bhutan, I too have been providing different updates for our international clients and institutions. So based on that, we were watching very closely. And then so I just thought that we would do this presentation across 4 parts. First, talk about what were some of the key things in the past 5 years. Then we look at, sort of what happened this time elections. Then we talk about what was really the part of elections. And then talk about some of the key issues like Amit was talking about. There's definitely more interest from the regional powers to be India and China, as well as we have US and Quad and other interests around Nepal. So based on that, these are the 4 parts I would have my presentation and discussions. grouped under, and then we can go in for question and answers. So important to look at in the past 5 years is that this is the first time that a full term of a parliament was seen in Nepali history. So 5 years, the parliament completed 5 years. It never has happened before. Generally, it used to have elections very quickly. So the constitution was designed that way. Of course, we had a majority government that was led by the UML, but that went through internal squabbles. And then we had two prime ministers in this 5-year period. There has been many deadlocks coming out of the ruling party, UML, that was ruling, that had won the elections with a thumping majority. They split with the Maoist center. And then in turn, UML, the remaining UML again went through a split, by which another CPN, United Socialist, was born. So we have seen a lot of splits. And of course, there were many other parties that went under a different permutation combination of splits and coming together. That what meant was that from July 2019, that's about 3.5 years, we have seen an inactive parliament. Legislations have just been pending. We have not seen much activity in terms of pushing reforms, bringing about recalibrating some of the relationships that we are talking about. So that's where we are standing. And then it has been also that the elections were very personality driven. The last parliament, you had these 7 or 8 key leaders representing different parties, 8 old men, which I'll talk about. There was again campaign to remove all of them, a really big citizens campaign. So we saw that it was more about conveniences of alliances between these different men coming from different parties, rather than any coalition towards some economic agenda or ideology, or bringing about different change around economy, geopolitics, or other things that Nepal needed to do. So that's where the last 5 years were. But also, let's not forget, it was the first parliament under the new constitution, 2015, and a federated Nepal with 753 local governments, 7 provinces, for which there was a lot of discussions, debate, and about 9 years of discussion, debates, 2 constituent assemblies that led to that constitution. So we need to also bear in mind that this has been the first parliament that came to an end, and it was a government under a political transition. So that's part one. So the part two, when this elections began, there was this big campaign called "No, Not Again," hashtag "No, Not Again." So they were taken to court also. So this campaign basically said, we don't want the old leaders back again. And those who are hogging the space for the past 30 years, we don't want them again. So that was a big campaign. We also saw that the parties were not willing to reform. Party tickets were handed over based on what funding people raise, or based on nepotism, or based on certain groups within the party. So many people didn't get tickets, so people went in as independents, and that's something that we saw. And we also saw that the parties were not willing to push women leaders or push young leaders. They basically kept status quo, wanted their own kitchen cabinet, their internal coteries to work around. So that's something that we saw. We also saw that there was a lot of power brokering going on. So it was about an alliance of conveniences rather than an alliance of saying that this is what we are going to do once we come into power. So that's how the elections went into. And we see, and we will discuss later as to how this convenience of the alliance of conveniences backfired to a large extent. The Election Commission, while they have done a pretty good job with peaceful elections, very few places we had challenges in terms of booth capturing or security. But the election commission, a lot of people also said, were not very independent. They could not take action against breaking of rules and protocols by some of the senior leaders, whereas they went after, for instance, the independent cabinet candidate from Lalitpur 3, Toshima Karki, and by disqualifying her candidature, and that actually led her to get more publicity and in the end win the election. So it is very interesting to see how the election commission, because they are at the end of the day political party appointees, they were not as independent that as we would think about. Then if we go into what happened with the results of the election, so Nepal has this, it's a combination of first past the post, a direct election of representatives, 165 of them, and 110 that comes through a closed proportional representation ballot. And you only become a national party if you get 3% of the total votes that went in. And based on that, you become a national party. And if you're a national party, then you get proportional representation. So on that basis, there are 275 seats up in this elections, 165 directly elected, and 110 from proportional representation. In terms of about 8 out of 18 million voters, 61% voted. And we have now 7 national parties emerge, apart from the UML, the Communist Party, Nepal United Marxist-Leninists. We have too many communist parties, actually. So just bear with me as I sort of have their names out. Then there's the Nepali Congress that has won the maximum number of seats. Then there's the Communist Party Nepal Maoist Center that has lost a lot of base. They are the ones who, let's not forget, in 2008, they nearly had 1/3 of the seats in the Constituent Assembly. From there, they've been relegated to just 10 seats. Then you have the new parties that have emerged. And among the new parties that have emerged is the Royalist Party, the Rashtra Prajatantra Party. They've been able to win 10 seats. And then a new wave of independent candidates who have now got 21 seats, including PR. So that's those are the main ones. And then in some of the Tarai and Western Nepal, there were newer parties that have emerged, again challenging the traditional Madhes parties. So there's been a lot of shift, new kids on the block, existing ones being challenged. And among the people who were elected, only 10 of them directly elected are under 40. So it's still the number, the members are still older people. Of course, a lot of existing 6 of the current cabinet ministers lost. A lot of senior political party leaders across parties lost. But then among the people who won, there were 43 new faces we are going to see in the parliament. And we are also going to have more than 30 plus business people. So these are contractors, people who have conglomerates. And so they have been there. And what we also saw with this elections is that we had independents who won on a shoestring budget. And we also saw that coalitions didn't work. You had the Maoists voting for, who refused to vote for the Congress, who were controlling the powers when the insurgency was going on. At the same time, Congress was having problem voting for people who have killed their own cadre. So those are the things that we saw. Also, one of the key things that we noticed this time and in the win of the independence was that the diaspora, the Nepali diaspora in 180 countries, pushing people to vote for certain candidates. And that's how we also saw that the independents garnered a lot of votes and it came to the proportional representation. So when we look at the future, so some of the key issues, the fourth part, when you look at it, one is that we have new faces. So I remember when we were looking at the election, say in August, we were saying that at least 15, 20 new parliamentarians would come, new voices would come that is going to change the discourse of the parliament. And these are educated people who have degrees, who have international exposure. They are going to come and change. The second is that we would see some of these new parliamentarians and committees, parliamentary committees, which we have seen not very functioning very well when it comes to in the past. We have hardly seen efficient parliamentary committees, and so that's something that we see in a positive way. The discourse in the parliament is going to change. We are going to have more informed people, educationists, people in the health sector, people who have worked around the world. They are going to come and change the discourse. And then we would also see that there's going to be a change in how the new parties are going to deal with the international agencies, be it on international development partners, the issue of the Millennium Challenge Corporation, MCC, that has been a big issue in Nepal. So those are some of the key pointers that we see that is going to go under transformation, which means that how bilateral relations are going to go, how Nepal is going to deal in multilateral partnerships, how Nepal is going to align itself coming out in the future. So those are some of the key areas where we expect some change to come in. Having said that, I think the key, I would end by looking at a Nepal that has transformed in the past 17 years to a large extent. And we have Nepalis in 180 countries. Per capita is very high. Asset prices continue to increase, influence to drive, and that society that have seen insurgency, that has seen earthquake, that has seen blockade, and it has just lockdowns and pandemic. Looking at the successes of the past, and perhaps we feel that there has been the voting that has come out, and they have led how far these changes are going to work and how far it will actually change, or we go back to status quo. The journey around the last, let me stop here and hand it over to Amit.
Thanks, Sujit, for your presentation, represent the exact picture of what Nepal is going through. I'll start with my first question. Although I have two more questions to go after this, but I think I'll start last question and then you respond to it, and then I'll move to my second and third question. So, sitting at Kathmandu, you must be aware about the news and also rumors. Can you tell me who is going to be, or who is going to be the next PM, which alliance is going to form the next government, and whether it will provide political stability or not?
So when it comes to the next government, as the discussions are unfolding in Kathmandu, we would see that the current coalition is going to lead the next government, but it's going to be very, very difficult to say who may be the prime minister, the next prime minister coming up. We wouldn't. It's still speculation because there are, I would say, three things. One is within the Nepali Congress, who is going to emerge as the parliamentary leader, who is going to become the prime minister, whether it is going to be the current prime minister or is it going to be a new face. So there's been a lot of shake-up within the parties that's there. The second is that how does the Maoist center perceive the power sharing equation? Because Pushkar Kamal Dahal Prachanda does have ambitions of becoming the next prime minister. So he keeps this ambition, and we'll see how that is going to pan out. That's second. And third is about what type of coalition they are going to cobble. And if they are going to get the righteous parties and they are going to get the independents, they are going to have certain demands on who is going to lead and what sort of structure is going to take place. And as we said, at the top, we don't see much changing. But then, as we said, for us, the more important thing is whether the new parliamentary committees that are going to be formed, the way the parliament is going to function, will that undergo change, whether it's going to be cabinet led or it is going to be led by legislation, whether the prime minister is going to run the country from his house or whether he'll start going to office and he'll start hosting cabinet meetings there and work with committees rather than their own kitchen cabinet. Those are the key indicators that we need to see and watch for, rather than looking at who is going to lead it. Whoever is going to lead it, the ways in which things are managed, that needs to go through the change. So that's where we are. Over to you, Amit.
So political establishment. Do you think that there's going to be a political establishment to lead Nepal for long term?
Oh, yeah, I think when we talk about stability now, what is stability? We had a very stable 30 years of Panchayat, but that didn't lead anywhere. So it's all about, what does stability mean? I think instability is the only constant here. You can have a very stable, Zimbabwe had a very stable president for 30, 35 years, in Mugabe. Did that help? So it's to figure out, I think as a parliamentary democracy, we need to function through institutions being built, institutions functioning, legislative processes going the right way, judiciary, independent judiciary. So governance is going to be a key. So rather than focusing on the stability or instability, I think institutional existence has to be important, and the way policy formulation and how the country is governed, that has to undergo a transformation.
So now coming to the policies, since I have got your pieces also on environment issues. A long time back, I read your piece on how religious groups can help in addressing the environmental issues in Kathmandu post, I think, more than 1 year back. So whether environment issues affect the voters, and how much it's included in the party's manifesto, political party's manifesto. This is important because in August, Nepal had a deal with World Bank, and there's still opposition going on because they don't want the groups which are opposing. They say that we don't need loan for that. They have to finance instead of giving us loan. So how much you look at the environmental issues?
Of course, it's a very important issue, irrespective of whichever government is going to come to play. That's how we see it. But we don't see direct. Of course, there's lip service from all the parties. But if you look at the core of it, I mean, all the parties just before the elections, even a couple of months back, they were jointly pushing for this new airport coming in the Tarai in Nijgar, a new international airport, which is basically a big logging contract. So if you look at most of the political parties, they depend on funding that comes from individuals and companies that are involved in massive resource extraction, natural resource its extraction. So from that perspective, yes, there is lip service. Of course, for Nepal as such, it is a very important issue. Like as you rightly mentioned, when you're looking at the World Bank program, Green Resilient Inclusive Development Grid program prioritizes Nepal's sensitivity towards environment, towards the impact of climate change, towards inclusion in a big way. So there is, if Nepal needs to move, then the money that's going to flow in as investment is going to be in those areas. So from that perspective, it's a very important issue, but we don't see it being given so much of priority by either of the governments because they have their own compulsion, because all their party funding comes from a business community that is deeply engaged in natural resource extraction. Yeah, over to you.
Did you play a role in determining voters' vote? How much voters are aware?
No, I don't think it does. In Nepal, this time's election has not been about ideology or what a party says about environmental issues or what a party says about local issues or political issues. This is the voting in Nepal is generally either it's party based or person based. Agenda does not come much, and also we have seen the type of coalitions that are formed post election. It doesn't matter what ideology you come with. The right wing works with left wing, and so a centrist party works with the extreme left, and so all sorts of permutation combinations take place. So it doesn't really, the voter doesn't really care about that, and maybe a small portion does, but majority of the voters, and especially rural voters, don't care. Because if we see the emergence of the independent parties where some of these issues have been raised, they are more concentrated in the urban centers than rural.
Coming to the next policy issue, people outside Nepal talk a lot about the foreign policy in Nepal. So the leaders have talked about that they are going to maintain a balance between India and China, the two major actors. Now US is also there. So with the new government coming in, say in a week or in a month time, so do you think that there is going to be some change with the foreign policy, or going to be safe? It's going to be a continuity of the past.
I think time will only tell whether there's going to be. It's about who is there in power. If we see some of the younger generation and newer faces come around, I think we may see some shift. But we also need to understand that the geopolitical challenges at this point is, especially after the war in Ukraine, is a big issue. I think globally countries are facing this. And if you see the skirmishes between India and China that is taking place, that has put relationship not only for Nepal, but other countries in South Asia and Southeast Asia under tremendous pressure as to which side do you move. And I think rather than choosing sort of one group versus the other, Nepal needs to develop a foreign policy that would work with India, China, US, and the other 180 countries where Nepalis are there and Nepal has a relationship with. So it's about expanding the horizon, and that would only happen, perhaps, I would see, is that if we would see some new faces, and not necessarily as ministers, but new faces in some of the key positions, political appointments. And that's where some transformative thinking can take place. For instance, who's going to run programs on economic diplomacy? Who's going to run programs ensuring that bilateral meetings between countries are taking place, for instance, with India on energy, on trade, so ensuring those issues are taken up. So it will all depend on how these would pan out, rather than sort of who would be in the power. So the priorities would be in the system, processes, and institutions. And irrespective of whoever comes in, they have to mend their ways to be able to use institutional framework, use structural thinking to move ahead. That's how it's going ahead.
Yeah, because in manifesto, everyone political parties manifestos looks like same. They talk about maintaining balance, but when it comes to power, when they come to government, they start dealing with the situation in different ways. So
yeah, I think it's just on the manifestos. I joke with the candidates who were candidates for the political parties, and I asked them, "Have you read the manifesto?" And many of them would say that I haven't. So it's very funny, and it's across parties. So there are some people who have drafted the manifestos. Parts of them they sort of pick up, but if you ask the candidates who are fighting the election, how many of them have read the manifesto, from page A to page Z, then you can literally count them.
But there is a question from audience, and the question is, do you think the recent wave of independent candidates in Nepal is just a temporary glitch, or do they really have something substantial to challenge the existing political order?
No, I think that's a very good question, and I think I would say this would be a more sustained wave. So if you look at how this began was that during the local elections, you had the mayor of Kathmandu elected and the mayor of Dharan elected and they were fighting elections on a shoestring budget. So what has been proved is that you don't need, and so many of the independents who have been elected, we know, they literally had very little financial resources or, sort of resources of a big party backing up, big names making speeches. So that would encourage more people to join politics. And if some of these people would be able to deliver, uh, we would see, I would think that there will be more people joining politics and getting into elections in years to come, and especially the 2027 elections, there should be a big force to reckon with. Very much like how the Aam Aadmi Party emerged in India, a similar parallel we can draw the way uh, things are emerging in Nepal. But of course, at this point of time, I should also mention that this has been urban centric. In the rural areas, it's still a challenge, but then a large part of Nepal is now in urban centers. So we would see that sort of spreading across urban centers in Nepal.
What about their political ideology? Are they center to left or center to right?
Oh, I couldn't get the question well. Yeah.
What about their political ideology? Like Ravi's party.
Oh, see, it's more of their current state is on being anti-establishment. They came to power with anti-establishment, but the ideology they would be closer to the right. That's most of the analysts are saying, and there's a bit nationalism out there. But they also have the agenda in their agenda, uh, better governance, better reduction around corruption, inclusivity in terms of and making having a government that delivers, and especially on the services. So that's where we see the priority areas rather than ideology. I would use the word priority areas for these guys. At the same time, they do have some definitive views around foreign policy and how Nepal should conduct itself as far as the world is concerned.
And then there's also a question, I read it, that what is the status of MCC debate? In your view, what are the chances of the new parliament push ahead and implement MCC?
No, the MCC has already been implemented in the parliament. Now, unless it is revoked by the parliament, it is something that has been approved, agreed. The project is already being implemented, so there's not going to be going back on that. And now, if there is so much of discussion and debate in the parliament around that, it may just have attention. But then now to cancel the agreement is something that I don't think it's possible, because in the international agreement and both two parties have signed, implemented it. Yeah, so that's how I see it.
All political parties agree on MCC. Although they have some differences, but finally they agree. So the issue of MCC. One of the interesting things which came out of
Amit, you're not clear. I'm not being able to hear you clearly.
I said that almost all political parties agreed on MCC. There, there were some differences, but they just managed to iron out all the differences. What I am saying that one of the major things which happened in elections that with old Madhes leaders,
Yeah.
the old Madhes leaders now.
Amit, you're not clear. I couldn't get you. I only got the Madhes leader part of it.
Yeah, you're saying that what's the future of old Madhes leaders now?
Like all leaders, I think whether it be Madhes Par or whether it be across any of these parties, I think the key is that they need to realize that they need to fall off and to retire. I think that's going to be important. And we've also seen in Madhesh there is a new wave, a new set of leaders, new parties. and that is going to displace the old ones. And I think that's happened in the Madhesh. We saw that happen in Sudur Pachim, and these are the trends we would see. So the sooner they realize that they have become irrelevant and leave the stage for younger people, I think that's better. And I think that's the message that's coming across from voters who voted for non-traditional parties. Let's not forget, nearly 15% of the votes went into these new parties that have emerged, 20% of the votes. So which basically shows that there's appetite for change, and there's demand for change.
So, we don't have questions from the audience now. Maybe there will be some maybe typing or so. Since you are economist, so how you see the economics in economics terms, that what the new, do you have any advice to the new government how to tackle this inflation, rising inflation, and the report talks about that in 1 year it's going to be more than 12% increase.
I think when it comes to inflation, there are two parts we need to look at. One is that our currency and our economy is tied up with India. So if India sneezes, then Nepal catches cold. So we have to be, we need to understand that if there's inflation in India, it will happen 1.6 times higher here, more times here. So it all depends on how the Indian economy is going to fare in the days to come, and that's going to impact Nepal. That's one. The second part is that it's a global phenomenon. It's not only the rising prices is not only Nepal, and if you look at emerging markets and developing economies, if you look at in Africa, East Asia, everywhere, you see Eastern Europe, you see inflation uh, taking place, and especially the war in Ukraine has had impact on basic commodities like food, fuel, construction materials, and others. So that's going to keep pushing. So which means that we have to find more ways to boost the economy through investments, through job creation, and if there's more economic activity, you create better shock absorbers to take on inflation. So that's going to be, and that will only come through investments. And if you want investments, then you need reforms. So that's it. We go back to the same story and the cycle as to why we need second generation reform, are more efficient and very sort of service oriented government, and that would give confidence for investors, and there's more investment and there's more economic activity, then you have better cushioning against inflation, because a lot of the stuff on rising prices is beyond Nepal's control, because we are a very import dependent economy. And so that's where we have very little leverage over how we can manage. So it's all about building up your own sort of your resilience around.
There's a question from audience. I read, how does the current parliament think of relations with China? I think he means that new parliament.
New parliament vis-a-vis China.
Yeah.
Yeah, China. Yeah. So I mean, we need to reckon that China is not only our neighbor, but it is a global force that everybody is realizing it now, and to see that we need to have a strategy to deal with China. Uh, every country is developing strategy to deal with different powers, be it India, be it US, be it China. So the importance is that rather than having knee-jerk reaction to things, what is going to be important is to see that how Nepal builds a China strategy, builds an India strategy, builds a US strategy, and to say that, and it is consistent. It doesn't, wobble. Like today you say, okay, China come invest. Tomorrow we say, no, 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 we don't want your investment. And day after again, you go and tell them we want your investment. That's not going to work. And so we need consistency, whether we want Chinese investment, whether we want Chinese tourists. And if they are a large economy, then we need to figure out how we deal with them. So it's all about figuring out a strategy. And hopefully some of the people that are going to go into the parliament is hopefully we'll have a more policies and strategies in coming up rather than the knee-jerk reactions we had in the past.
Uh, there is also a question from audience, and I think that do you see rapid transformation in development landscape of Nepal post this election, or will the development project meander as usual?
So, yeah, for me, for that question, I think the key thing is to say that what do you mean by development? Because what the last governments in the past 10, 15 years have given the impression is that having bulldozers running around in the hillsides, what I call is bulldozer terrorism, is a sign of development. Erecting, sort of obscene structures across the country is seen as development. So it's about what do you mean by development? Does it mean that we provide better access to healthcare, better access to education, quality education? Is that development? So I think it's also boils down to what do we mean by development? Is it building more roads, or is it having the quality of the existing roads better? So that's where the priority. We have to see where their priority is going to go, because I think we have all been misguided by this concept of development means more, sprawling urban centers, cutting down trees, building airports around by chopping trees. So that's become the sign of development. So we need to also have a discourse on what does Nepal's own model of development means, and how does that link to livelihood, link to access to health, education, and social services, access to government services, ease of getting services from the government. I think those are going to be the priorities around defining development has to perhaps undergo transformation. And perhaps this parliament, I'm hopeful, is going to create new definitions around what does development, progress, and growth would be.
There's another question from audience, and it's a two questions. I'll break it. What sort of climate challenges does Nepal face? The first part. The second part, does religion play a role in domestic politics and voting patterns in the recent election?
Yes, I think in terms of climate change, it's very important for Nepal. As I've been emphasizing, we are in one of the most ecologically fragile parts of the world. Also, our challenge is not limited to ourselves, but we are interconnected with our neighbors. So if there's burning of fodder in India, we are impacted by the sort of smoke that comes here. If there is more rampant construction in India, we see our riverbeds drying off. So there is interlinkages that we need to understand and work on. So that's one. Definitely, it is a very important part of what we need to look and think of. As far as the religion in voting is concerned, I don't think so. That's a big issue. There may be some ethnic groups and divisions around ethnic groups may have impacted the results in some areas, but not religion. And also, we have not seen, like in the past, overt interventions from any of the international powers or neighboring countries in the elections this time.
There's another question from audience. How do we understand the low voter turnout, 61%?
Yeah, it all depends on what is low and what is high, and in the sense that let's not forget that 61% is, if you compare to other democracies, 61% is not bad. It's about comparing with constituent assembly elections or local elections, because in local elections there's more interest, and we just had one just in April. Uh, that's one. The other is that the diaspora is not allowed to vote. So we have 18 million voters, and out of that, 4 to 5 million are outside Nepal. So if you take that out, then you look at about the 10 million people who voted, 11 million people who voted. It's among the people who are in Nepal, it's a significant number. Also, we don't have postal ballots. So if you are from, say, Pokhara and you're living in Kathmandu, there's no way you can vote. So you have to go to your constituency to vote. So given these limitations, I think we don't take it as a low voter turnout. It's given large number of people outside Nepal, voters outside Nepal, and given that we just had local elections, and as the democracy and democratic practices are maturing, 61%, I don't think is a low turnout, is what many observers, that's not my area of expertise, but a lot of observers have been making that comment.
Yeah, 61% is fair number. You cannot say that it's a very low. It's a fair number. And given the voters apathy, whosoever in government, they have some. And why don't they change the EVM? It's taking a long time. Electronic voting machine for counting, still using ballot. So I was reading some news they are coming out with that the new government may look for using EVM for the next election.
I don't know. This has been debated. I think the trust on the system. So even if you look at in developed countries, so even if you look at the United States, you look in Canada, so many countries, voting is still not electronic. The trust is still weak, and let's not forget there are so many challenges when it comes to EVM. So I don't think they are ready. I think we just need to. Personally, I've written about these issues on this issue, and we need to look at like the leapfrog beyond the landline and straight went into mobiles, or from without doing emails, we straight went to WhatsApp. I think we can get into internet-based voting, and by hopefully in a couple of years, we've seen there are countries like Estonia and all who have done it very well. So web-based voting with 5 million outside. So I think there would be solutions that would be cheap and efficient, that would allow leveraging technology for voting beyond EVM. I think EVM may not work, but Nepal could be the place to experiment the next phase of electronic voting using the internet, as we are very well connected with the internet on the internet. So there could be solutions. There are already some people working on it, and hopefully in another 5 years or so, we may in next election see some piloting that can be done with some of those web-based voting tools.
Related to elections, I was reading a tutorial from Kathmandu Post and talks about social inclusiveness in this election. So how you look at this issue? It's a bigger issue in plural society and so divided society. How you look in the Nepal?
See, what happens in politics is a reflection of our society. That's how I it. And so if we have a patriarchal society where there is no inclusion at home, we should not be expecting inclusion taking place in the parliament and in politics. It's like when budgets come out, I ask this question that people who don't make budgets for their families, they have no right to question the national budget. It's the same thing. So if you are not practicing social inclusion in your own organization, in your family, in your companies that you're operating in, then it's very difficult to demand that. So we need to look at how society is structured, and we need to also look at, we just come out of a very feudal structure, very recent, or even 20, 30 years ago, the role of women, role of the marginalized community. In so many places, caste system still prevails. You look at Dalit representation is still low anywhere. So if Dalit representation is low in all areas, we can't expect just in Parliament they get representation. So that is due to the way societal structure is there. And so until some of these fundamental changes take place, it's going to be very difficult for some of the larger changes to be reflected in politics and the parliament.
The question, could digital governance become a trend in Nepal?
Amit, I lost you.
Hello.
Ahmed, you're still online. Please carry on.
Hello. Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you, but you're breaking a bit.
Yeah, could digital governance become a trend in Nepal? This is a question from audience.
Digital governance, it can become, because they adopt adaptability and adoption of digital platforms have been very encouraging in Nepal. So, and especially because of the pandemic, if you look at, say, use of e-commerce sites, use of social media platforms for trade, commerce, that has increased. So digital payments have been in a big way. But then we need to have a lot of changes in legislation to allow and legitimize digital platforms. So you may have, say, you can do so many things online, but you need to keep paper trail. So it defeats the whole purpose of digitalization of moving towards digital platforms. So those are some of the things that needs to be looked at. Definitely there is opportunity, there are opportunities, and as I was mentioning earlier, in the new parliament, with some of the new the parliamentarians who have been working in these areas, hopefully they will be able to educate the other parliamentarians, push towards digital governance, digital platforms for service delivery, and for government service delivery, government payments, and it has worked in many other countries, and we have seen it work in countries in Africa, emerging countries in Africa. So where literacy levels, exposure levels, connectivity levels are very much like in Nepal. If it has works there, then it should work here also. So we do have good hope on this as far as the new parliament is concerned.
I have a question that many people, when they talk about Nepal's foreign policy, they look at the Nepal-China, Nepal-India relations. But also, if you look at Nepal is playing a very important role, have a very close relation with Bangladesh in development sector. It's also a very close relation with Bhutan and other South Asian countries. So how you look at this? Because when whosoever looks at Nepal's foreign policy, it's always India, China, now US. We need to look at the smaller countries with which Nepal has very good relations, especially the small South Asian countries.
Yeah, in South Asia, I think we have a very checkered relationship with Bhutan after the exodus of Nepalis in 1992. So with Bhutan, as the challenge remains. With Bangladesh, we have been discussing around export of power. So that would form the basis of the future relationship, hopefully, between Nepal and Bangladesh. We'll see that. As far as the other countries are concerned, where I would just look at the foreign policy being driven by where diaspora Nepalis are. So, like for instance, in the United States, we have 500,000 Nepalis out there. In Australia, it's close to 200,000. UK, it's the same. So, from that perspective, I think it's going to be important to look at this. Look at foreign policy based on where Nepalis are, because say for instance in Portugal we have 30,000 Nepalis are there. So it also we need to piggyback on the presence of Nepalis, and one is, yes, what are the larger geopolitical issues? Two is proximity, like Bangladesh and our neighborhood, even in Southeast Asia, like Thailand, Cambodia, and others. Linkages on tourism, for instance, linkages with Sri Lanka because of Buddhist tourism, with Cambodia, with Thailand. So those are some of the new lenses we have to look at when it comes to foreign policy.
Yeah. Mm. So, any question from the audience? One of the issues. Hello, we are lost. Hello, Suri.
Yes, I'm here.
Yeah, in parts of India, there was lots of talk about the citizenship issue, which debated in Nepal before elections, just before elections. So, is the state, do you think that when the new government comes, they're going to be any change, or they're going to go with it? The Citizenship Act.
See, the Citizenship Act, I think, is a very complicated piece of, sort of a complicated piece, I would say. It has definitely dimensions around our relationship with India. There is a lot of domestic voter bank issues in terms of how the citizenship bill should move or not move. But definitely, we feel that there are two things: the citizenship. There are certain fundamental implementation of the constitution has to take place. Like, for instance, Nepalese men who marry foreign women, their children can get Nepali citizenship. But then, if it's a Nepali woman who marries a foreigner, then for their children to get citizenship has been a challenge. And also some of the citizenship through naturalization, some of the citizenship that people have not got citizenship certificates. So from the practical dimension, this has to be approached rather than the sort of dimension of ideology as to whether by giving citizenship there are going to be many Indians coming here, or people from other countries coming here. If Nepalis are traveling and settling down in different parts of the world and taking up citizenship in different parts of the world, then Nepal should also be open to it. And also linked to that is the issue of dual citizenship, because as millions of Nepalis are taking up citizenship across the world, how do you also get into the era of citizenship, which is very important. They are very important to look at. So that becomes a new set of thinking for the new parliament. Yeah, Amit. I think we've lost Amit.
Yeah, sorry everyone. Dr. Ami is trying to reconnect right now. I've already seen him enter Zoom, so let's just give him a few seconds.
Yeah.
While we wait for Dr. Amit to sort out his internet connection, Mr. Sujif, I have a question here for you from the audience.
Yes, please. Yeah.
Yeah, so you mentioned earlier that women leaders have not been at the forefront of Nepalese politics for the last few decades. So given at this time, fresh faces have revealed female leaders. So moving forward, do you think there will be more gender diversity in the composition of the political parties? Thank you.
Yeah, I think earlier, be it social inclusion, be it on gender, be it on ethnic groups or sort of the excluded community. It's all about how the society moves, and I think it, as was mentioning earlier, also is that the politics is a reflection of how the society is structured. But we are seeing more women leaders come out. Like for instance, last year in the bar exams for lawyers, 88 of the people who got through were, who passed were women. We have more women bureaucrats now. So we have more women as entrepreneurs. So as we are going to see more women in the workforce, be it in banking, be it in financial services, be it in entrepreneurship, or be it in different professions. So we would see the reflection of that in politics also. As if you look at, in 1990, 12% of the people who passed the school exams were women, girls, and 88% boys. Now it's 50-50. So that's, so which means that in another 10, 15 years, we'll see more able women come into leadership. The transformation is taking place. But then we have to also understand that societally, as a society, we are very patriarchal. We also believe in a lot of tokenism. So we have women leaders, but they are wives or sort of sisters or daughters of leaders. They are just they are there because of the patriarchy has to change. On this front, I at a personal level, I'm very hopeful the transformation.
Thank you for that. We have another question. This question is related to the anti-Indian sentiments in the country. So do you think that the anti-Indian sentiments has grown or reduced since the last election?
I couldn't get the question, the first part of the question.
This question is on...
Oh dear, could you repeat the question?
Okay, so the question is, compared to the last election, how have you observed the anti-Indian sentiments? Has it grown or reduced?
You're not, Claudia, I can't hear you clearly. You're breaking.
Oh, okay. Okay, am I okay now?
Yeah.
Okay. So since the last election, how has anti-Indian sentiments developed within the country? Has it grown or reduced?
Sorry, Claudia, I'm not being able to get you. The last parts you've been tracking. If you could type the question, I think that might be easier. See, I mean, it's it depends. It's both ways. So anti-India sentiments grow not because Nepalis would want it, but also due to certain actions of India. I think let's not forget 2015 we had a blockade, and then after that there was a mechanism that was created called the eminent person group, comprising of eminent people from both sides. We don't know, that was just brushed aside. So the way India has conducted does not give tremendous sort of reasons to believe that Nepalis would change the way they think. For instance, our ambassador in Delhi is yet to receive a formal, sort of a meeting with the foreign minister. So these are, sort of things that irritate Nepalis. And like, for instance, when you take when you fly out of Kathmandu to take a flight to go to India, you have to go through a final security check at Pali airport that is manned by Indian security people. So these optics, and this is going on for 24 years. Some of these things, like for instance, demonetization, there was 7 crores that Nepali central bank had, which needed to be converted. So these things happen. So these events do not, sort of help to build pro-India sentiments in Nepal. And also, Nepalis are not as earlier. Nepalis were very dependent on India to travel for education, for healthcare, for work. But now Nepalis are traveling to 180 countries. India does not really matter so much that it used to matter 20, 30 years ago. So in that context, there is lesser discussion around India also. So we need to understand that. So in that context, the thought process around India does not change much. So rather than comparing between time periods, it's going to be important to look at what are some of the key drivers of this relationship and how can it be made better, or how can that be improved. That's where I think the direction.
How these sentiments affect improving the bilateral relationship, and especially after this border dispute set up in 2019, and then also issue between the water issue, the floodings. Then every year floods come, affect a part of India, and then they start blaming them. They start blaming them. So how these sentiments affect all such issues?
No, I think these sentiments do affect. I think it's on both sides. We have to see what we have not been able to do in both countries is to keep the relationship, also the official channels moving. For instance, having the bureaucrats, from both sides sitting in all the official meetings, and the optics have to be right. So if it is water, then have joint secretary level or secretary level meetings, ministerial level meetings. Just follow the official protocols rather than political parties falling into each other. So that these things are not helping. If there is a dispute around borderland, then there should be there should be a mechanism by which these issues are resolved. There are always issues with border. So I mean, Bhutan had a border. Bangladesh had a border issue with India, and they resolved after sitting across the table and then deciding on what should happen. So I think we have to follow formal, channels. And also we have to get it right. Like just after the election, the Indian ambassador visiting, the key leaders twice and covered in the papers do not give a good sense that India is not interfering. So these things have to be also managed well, because that's, in a country where there's so much of skepticism, these type of activities don't help in building confidence in the relationship. So those are, I think, I have been always proponent for formal structures, formal meetings. There are lots of mechanisms that have been developed to resolve border issues, water issues, electricity issues, and so we should trade issues, transit issues. So we should ensure that we keep the formal channels working rather than depend on informal channels that are led by intelligence people, led by political party, sort of power brokers. That has to come to an end.
Thank you, Sujin. Claudia, do you have other questions? Okay, so thank you, Sujit, for enlightening the audience and us about the situation in Nepal, and we discussed various issues which are not necessarily related to the selection, but policies like foreign policy and economic policies in Nepal. And we would like to have you again to talk and know more about Nepal and other issues which concerns Nepal. So now I would like to hand over to Claudia to conclude the session.
Hi. A great thanks to Mr. Sujeev and also Dr. Amit for chairing the session today and answering all our participants' questions. I'm sure all of us have learned a lot about the latest political landscape and changes in Nepal, and we await eagerly for the future of Nepal. So thank you everyone for participating in ISAS event today. We look forward to you participating in more events in the future. Thank you and goodbye.